Old hags can't be seen as women, can they? I'm divorcing you, so get lost. With a mocking smile, Dan said to me. This is the hospital where Dan is admitted, and I came here to take care of him. Despite my dedicated support while he was struck by illness, this is the thanks I get. It's just too cruel. Dan betrayed me with a calm face. Thinking back, I have always been treated terribly by him. Yet, why did I endure all this time? There's absolutely no benefit for me to stay married to such a horrible person. While thinking this in my heart, I slowly began to speak. I won't let Dan have his way anymore. Embracing a burning resolution in my heart, I faced Dan head-on. My name is Tracy Manning, a 45-year-old housewife who just had her birthday. My family consists of my son, Ryan, and my husband, Dan. Ryan has just started high school and is a very kind and good child. I think I did well in raising him. My husband Dan used to be quite handsome. It might be strange to say my own husband is handsome, but he was very popular back then. I fell for Dan at first sight, competed with my rivals at the time, and snatched the wife's seat from them. However, that handsomeness is a thing of the past. Hey, got anything to munch on? Now in his 40s, my husband has gained weight rapidly after Ryan was born. Currently sporting a considerably plump belly. There was a specific reason he got this fat. It was Dan's affair. While I was busy with Ryan's childcare, Dan had an affair because he felt lonely. His affair partner was a foodie, and as a result of keeping her company, he gained a lot of weight in a short period. I'm divorcing you. Wait, please. Give me one more chance. After discovering the affair, I intended to divorce Dan. However, he said he didn't want to part with Ryan, who had just been born, and swore never to cheat again. For me, I thought it pitiful for Ryan to be without a father. So I hesitated to go through with the divorce. Since then, Dan hasn't cheated, but his overweight figure remains unchanged. He promised to diet when we were rebuilding our relationship. But that promise has yet to be fulfilled. I've probably resigned myself to him staying in that shape for life. For me, it doesn't matter whether Dan is fat or thin. However, I just wish he would stop leading an unhealthy lifestyle. Dan hasn't lost weight because of his unhealthy habits, which he refuses to quit despite my warnings. How will he cope if he falls ill because of it? I've said countless times, but Dan doesn't listen at all. I wonder if it's useless to keep warning him, as my size and Dan's fat just keep increasing day by day. I'm a working housewife, and the company I've been working at since graduating from university has recently become quite busy. In the last few years, sales have increased significantly, and plans are underway to establish a branch. This has increased my workload, and I feel dizzyingly busy every day. But, I still need to make dinner, right? For Dan's health, I make time to cook meals despite being busy. However, my efforts seem futile. I failed the health checkup. I have to go for a re-examination next month. What, again? Dan fails his health checkups almost every year. It seems he failed again this year and reported it with a troubled look. Hey, where's the paper from the health checkup? Let me see it. Thinking it better to be informed, I asked Dan for it. However, he refused with a reluctant face. Why? It's not necessary, right? Just get re-examined, treated, and it's all done. But, what if something happens? Huh? You always make a big deal out of everything. It's not something to fuss over. Really? Dan just grumbled and didn't end up telling me the results of his health checkup. From that day, I started serving healthier meals. But Dan grimaced greatly at the sight of the food prepared. I can't feel satisfied with such bland food. He left most of the food I made untouched and instead bought microwave food and junk food to eat. It was okay, in small amounts, but the quantity he ate at once was astonishing, considering where he could possibly put all of it. At this rate, he'll need another re-examination next year. Hey, I won't tell you to stop eating, but could you reduce the amount? It's bad for your health, you know? Mom's right. Aren't you eating a bit too much? Even Ryan, who was in his growing phase, was taken aback by how much intensely flavored food Dan devoured. By the way, Ryan happily ate the healthy meals I prepared, enjoying them with a smile. However, it seems even his son's advice didn't reach Dan. Shut up. I bought it with my salary. You guys have no right to tell me what to do. Dan yelled at us in frustration. Ryan and I persistently cautioned him, but each time Dan would react angrily. And eventually, we found ourselves unable to say anything. One day, after continuing this lifestyle, what? My husband was taken to the hospital. Dan's workplace suddenly informed me that he had collapsed. Although I was at work, I rushed to the hospital where Dan was taken. According to the doctor, Dan had suffered a heart attack and needed emergency surgery. Still shaken, I signed the consent form. The surgery was successfully completed, and Dan was out of danger. Though relieved, I knew probably the unhealthy lifestyle was the cause of Dan's heart attack. The doctor also mentioned he was a bit overweight. It was all due to Dan's own doing. I thought he might reflect on this and change his ways from now on. But it seems I was too optimistic. Hey, could you buy me some soda? And I want some chips too. I'm sick of the bland hospital food. As soon as he regained consciousness and felt better, Dan tried to get me to buy him snacks. I refused, astounded. That's impossible. An unhealthy lifestyle caused your heart attack, remember? You need to change your ways from now on. However, Dan lashed out at me in anger. I'm a patient, aren't I? It's awful of you to say such things. You're the worst. Dan continued to demand things from me, acting as if it was only natural for me to obey because he was a patient. I could accommodate him within reason, but I couldn't accept his demands about food. When I refused, Dan would become furious. Sometimes, he even threw things at me. As I grew increasingly disheartened, Dan, who had to stay hospitalized, successfully underwent a forced diet and was in a much better mood. Hospitalization isn't so bad. He said this nonchalantly while looking in the mirror, unaware of my struggles. The remnants of his once handsome features were emerging, and recently, he's been proudly talking about how female nurses and other patients often talk to him. I'm exhausted. In addition to work and household chores, taking care of Dan made my days overwhelmingly busy. Finally settling down at night, I sighed deeply as I sat in the living room chair. Hey, Mom, I'll take over the household chores from now on. To which, a concerned Ryan made such an offer. What? That's okay, Ryan, you have club activities, right? There are no matches for a while, and it's all self-practice lately. Besides, shouldn't I learn some housework for when I get married in the future? It was nice that Ryan offered to help. But I was most pleased by his mention of preparing for marriage. Dan has always stubbornly insisted that housework is a woman's job, and has hardly done any himself. It's hard to believe that Ryan grew up with such a father and turned out to be such a good kid. All right. Maybe I'll take you up on that offer then. Ryan smiled broadly and nodded when I said that. I thought that with Ryan around, we could overcome anything. But life isn't always that sweet. One day, as usual, I went to visit Dan at the hospital. Ah. What? There was a nurse with her uniform undone on Dan's bed. The young woman, who let out a short scream, and I, were stunned. Her name tag read Lauren Reed. Dan hurriedly ushered the nurse out and said with a sigh. Call before you come. No, I did call. But who was that? What were you doing? I knew the answer but asked anyway. When Dan cheated on me a decade ago, he swore he'd never do it again. Had he really refrained from cheating because he had repented? Or was it simply because he had become too unattractive for anyone to bother with him? I was shocked, and Dan smirked confidently. What do you think? It's cheating. I've lost weight and started getting attention again. Man, I could use a few more bodies to handle this. But you promised not to cheat. Then, Dan said with a mocking smile. That was a long time ago. Old hags aren't women to me. I'm divorcing you, so get lost. How could you? Then, Dan revealed something even more shocking. Actually, she's pregnant with my child. I have to take responsibility as a man, right? He spoke pompously about responsibility, but what about his responsibilities to our family? I started to retort but then closed my mouth. Instead, I whispered quietly. I see, that's unfortunate. Well, I'm going to get a divorce form now. Yeah, please do. Stunned, I went to the city hall to get the divorce papers. After having Dan sign them at the hospital, I spoke while holding back tears. I wish you happiness. I'm leaving that house. Yeah. That house is mine, so it's only right that you leave. And I'll give you custody. He's more attached to you, and my girlfriend wouldn't want a kid with baggage. I didn't react to Dan's words and silently put the divorce papers in my bag. Dan watched me despondently, almost enjoying the sight. I should have done this sooner. You've been so arrogant lately. You've had the nerve to talk back to me all this time? This is the result. You're getting divorced because of your own doing. I had fallen in love with Dan and married him. He had been comfortable mistreating me because he was confident of my affection. But that was over now. I left Dan's belongings in the room and walked out of the hospital room. A month after divorcing Dan, Ryan and I had moved out of that house and were now living together. After settling all the formalities, Ryan and I were finally enjoying a day off with nothing to do. You've worked hard, Mom. I'll make lunch today. Really? Thank you, I'm looking forward to it. Ryan and I shared a calm smile. Just then, Dan unexpectedly called. Hello, hello? I answered the phone, wondering what it could be about. This was the first time Dan had called since our divorce. I really didn't want to answer, but I couldn't ignore it if it was an emergency. Then, I heard Dan's pained voice from the other end. Hey, I was told to pay the rest of the surgery bill. You haven't paid it. I sighed with exasperation at such a request. I haven't paid it. Why should I, a divorced woman, pay for your surgery? Indeed, I had been the one paying for Dan's surgery and hospital fees. Dan had always been too lazy to enroll in health insurance. As a result, I paid out of my own pocket. It was a considerable amount of money, but at the time, Dan was still part of my family. And I had no complaints about paying. However, Dan cruelly betrayed our family and pushed for a divorce. At that point, he was no longer my family, so there was no reason for me to pay. When I explained this to Dan, he seemed flustered on the phone. You were paying that much money? The amount on the receipt is pretty big. Yes. You were my family then. It's natural to pay that much for family. But we're not family anymore. Dan sounded desperate. You know I'm family. You know I don't have that much saved up. Of course, I know. You were always reckless with money. Indeed, since Dan's affair years ago, he had been reckless with money. Despite my warnings, he would only get angry. saying I shouldn't complain about how he spent the money he earned. He hadn't been very interested in food before, but influenced by his affair partner. He continued to spend a lot on meals even after they split up. He also wasted money on golf clubs that he gave up on after 3 days. And an expensive camera that just collected dust. Eventually, I gave up intervening in how he spent his money. Then you know I can't pay that much. Bring the money for the treatment to the hospital. Where are you now? Lauren went to our house, but she said no one was there. Lauren was Dan's affair partner. I was truly glad that Ryan and I had moved out. I never wanted to face the woman who had caused us so much trouble. I replied calmly to the frantic Dan. Why would I tell you? Right now, Ryan and I are enjoying very peaceful days. I absolutely refuse to let you disturb this peace. Since divorcing Dan and leaving that house, Ryan's face had brightened with more smiles. I've actually always wanted you to divorce Dad. You never seemed happy with him, and he was always saying mean things to me. I learned that Dan had even threatened to withhold Ryan's college funds if he didn't obey. Ryan is a kind child, but recently, he had been standing up more to Dan, who clearly didn't like it. If you keep defying your parents, I won't let it go easily. Dan had been trying to control Ryan behind my back. Hearing this made me dizzy with anger. That man, to say such awful things to his own son. I had thought Ryan would be sad without his father after a divorce, but I was completely mistaken. Living with Dan was what would have made us unhappy. I deeply regretted not divorcing sooner. Had we done so, we could have avoided many unhappy days. But now, we were free from Dan. No way would I let him take these days of freedom away from us. I was prepared to do anything to protect Ryan and myself. I will never tell you where Ryan and I are. With a firm resolve, I forcefully declared this to Dan. After a brief silence, I heard Dan sniffle on the phone. Is he crying? This situation is his own doing, and he doesn't even have the right to cry. I almost blurted out those words, but I quickly swallowed them. It would be pointless to say such things now. Please, pay for the treatment. Dan begged with a tearful voice. I frowned deeply in displeasure as I answered. That's why I won't pay. We're divorced, aren't we? Don't you care what happens to me? You married me because you loved me, right? Dan cried out in agony. Indeed, I did love Dan. He was very handsome in the past, and I fell for him at first sight. Initially, it was his looks I fell for, but as I got to know him, I also came to love his smart demeanor towards women and his kind personality. Looking back, Dan has always been popular with women and knew how to act charmingly. Probably because it made him more appealing. You looked sad when I signed the divorce papers, right? You still have feelings for me, right? If you pay for the treatment, I'll divorce Lauren and remarry you. So? What nonsense are you talking about? Huh? Dan made a foolish sound. My love for Dan is a thing of the past. After Ryan was born, when Dan cheated, my love for him disappeared. I looked sad at that time because I was utterly disgusted with myself for not seeing through Dan's infidelity. It was not because I still had feelings for him. Dan said he cheated because he was lonely since I was always busy with Ryan. However, Dan never helped me with housework or child rearing. Once, when I asked for even a little help, Dan scoffed. You can't even handle that? You're a failure as a mother. During a busy day and struggling with new motherhood, Dan's words were the last straw. Soon after, his infidelity came to light. And he seriously thinks I still have feelings for him? I stopped loving you the day you cheated, 14 years ago. Dan seemed stunned over the phone. Why? How could you? How could I? After such a terrible thing, and you ask why? You really don't understand people's feelings, do you? If you don't love me, why didn't you divorce me sooner? There were several reasons. First, it was a big risk to divorce with young Ryan. I also convinced myself that it was better for Ryan to have a father. Since the divorce debacle, I had lost my affection for Dan. We were just cohabiting family members. As the years passed living together, I developed familial affection for Dan. I couldn't forgive the past, but continuing to live as a family was one choice I thought possible. However, Dan cheated again right before my eyes. Whether Dan loves someone else, I no longer feel jealous. I'm angry because Dan broke his promises. He abandoned his responsibilities as Ryan's father. I felt intense anger about this. There's no way I have any lingering feelings for someone like that. Whatever happens to you, I don't care. Dan was lost for words at my response. Are you going to stay silent forever? I was enjoying a rare day off. I don't want to waste any more time dealing with you, so I'm hanging up, okay? When I said that, Dan hastily raised his voice. Wait. That's right. You can't possibly raise Ryan alone. He's going to college soon, and you'll need money. Don't you need me? His completely misguided words made me burst into laughter. What are you laughing at? Dan shouted from the other end of the phone. It seems he really doesn't understand anything about me. I decided to enlighten him with a bit of truth. I've been earning a higher salary than you for quite some time, you know? Unlike you, I don't waste money, so I've managed to save quite a bit. I'm not struggling financially at all, so no worries. That's why I wouldn't be in trouble without you. I've also got an education insurance plan for Ryan. Don't worry about his college expenses. We are completely fine without you. Indeed, I have been recognized at the company I've worked at since graduating from college and have been compensated accordingly. Since I needed to raise Ryan alone, I took a slightly longer maternity leave and ended up being promoted later than my peers. Nevertheless, by steadily working hard, I have been promoted to assistant manager. I had told Dan about the promotion, but it seems he believed, because I am a woman, I couldn't possibly be earning a significant salary. You always say you're busy with work, but it's just women's work, right? I'm much busier as a man. Don't neglect your household duties using work as an excuse. When I got busier at work after my promotion and couldn't cook, resulting in more takeout, this is what Dan said. No matter how much I explained my job or how hard it was, Dan just laughed it off. The only reason I could endure it was because of Ryan's kindness. It wasn't because of Dan. Rather, Dan was a burden to me. Only after the divorce did I realize this. Perhaps my own insensitivity also contributed to the worsening of the situation. But I won't make that mistake again. You haven't really contributed to the living expenses in recent years, have you? Didn't you ever wonder how we could continue living as usual? It's because I was earning. We have no problems without you. Then, Dan murmured with a trembling voice. But what about Ryan? Isn't he lonely without a father? What will his future spouse's parents think if he doesn't have a father? For Ryan's future, it's better if I'm around. I couldn't help but hold my head in dismay at his words. Then, Ryan, who had been listening to the conversation all along, signaled that he wanted to speak on the phone. Are you sure? It's okay. I have something I want to say to Dad. With confidence in his eyes, I nodded and handed him the smartphone. Hello, Dad? Ryan. Tell your mom too. You need me, right? However, Ryan responded immediately and clearly. No, we're not struggling at all. What? To me, Mom is my only parent. Dad, we're only connected by blood. I don't even like that, but I have to accept it. And about what you said regarding a future spouse. Having a parent like you would be a disadvantage for me. Ryan spoke dispassionately, denying Dan's statements. His face was calm, without any hint of wanting to get back at Dan. He was simply stating his feelings clearly. I'm really glad Mom divorced you. Thanks to that, I'm very happy now. If Mom ever thought about remarrying you, I'd do everything to stop it. Because that wouldn't make her happy. Dan seemed to have completely lost his ability to respond after hearing Ryan's calm words. Can you please never interfere with me and Mom again? You should just be happy with your affair partner. Wait, Ryan. I still want to be your father. Then why did you cheat? This is all your own doing, the result of your own actions. I don't think of you as my father anymore. Mom and I don't need you in our lives. I couldn't help but give a wry smile at his clear rejection. I never imagined Ryan would reject Dan so completely. I took the phone from Ryan and gave Dan my final words. You understand now? Just like Ryan said, don't ever interfere with us again. If you show up, I will consult a lawyer and take appropriate actions. Dan said nothing in response. I sighed softly and hung up the phone. Later, I heard that Dan paid the remaining surgery and hospital bills with money borrowed from a consumer finance company. If he had no money, he could have arranged a payment plan with the hospital. Or found a more sensible solution. Dan's thoughtless actions made me glad, once again, that I had divorced him. After settling down from the move, I took a little break and then hired a lawyer to claim damages for the affair. Simply divorcing over an affair was not enough for me. Dan apparently had no idea he would be sued for damages. He complained quite a bit to the lawyer I hired. Then, let's go to court or whatever is necessary. I am prepared for that. After telling this to my lawyer, Dan decided to quietly agree to the damage claims. At this point, Dan finally told his parents about our divorce and asked for their help to pay the damage claims. However, upon hearing this, Dan's parents were furious. They said they no longer considered him their son and declared they were cutting ties with him. Later, my mother-in-law contacted me. We've disowned him, but we don't want to cut ties with you and Ryan. Would you come visit us even though you're divorced? Yes, of course. I'll bring Ryan over again. Dan's parents were really kind and good people. Even though we live apart, they continue to support us. Ryan also wants to visit his grandparents, and we plan to visit them soon. Having been disowned by his own parents, Dan borrowed more money from consumer lenders to pay the damage claims. Currently, he is struggling just to pay the interest. I think he might declare bankruptcy eventually. But whatever happens to him is no longer my concern. Despite zero savings and falling back into debt, Dan managed to leave the hospital only to collapse again soon after. His lifestyle became even more unhealthy after our separation. By the way, he and the affair partner have split up. I also filed a claim for damages against her, but the lawyer told me something. She said she broke up with your ex-husband and asked to be forgiven for the damages, claiming she was not actually pregnant. It was a lie. That doesn't matter. I will still claim damages. Understood, I'll pass that along. So, I relentlessly pursued the damages claim against the affair partner. She probably thought Dan would divorce me and wasn't expecting him to be financially destitute. She was fired from her hospital job for having an inappropriate relationship with a patient during work and has been struggling to find a job. She pleaded with the lawyer due to her financial situation, but that's none of my concern. Eventually, she managed to scrape together the money to pay the damages, possibly using consumer credit as well. Well, the specifics don't matter, and I don't care to know. I breathed a sigh of relief when I confirmed the damages had been paid. Thus, my tumultuous days came to a close. Now, I am living peaceful and happy days with Ryan. Aware of Dan and the vindictive affair partner, I chose a highly secure apartment for our new home. Just to be safe. I keep in touch with my in-laws and am informed about Dan's situation to some extent. After paying the damages, Dan sold his house to pay off his debts and is now living a lonely life in an apartment. His body quickly returned to its previous state after a brief period of unhealthy weight loss. And he ended up in the hospital again, not because he was in shape, but because he had become emaciated. He looks much older than his age, in his 40s. Well, whatever happens to him, it's entirely irrelevant to us. Mom, I need to talk about something regarding university. Do you have time now? Yes, of course. Ryan has recently started to seriously think about his future. Although the divorce turmoil was tough on him, he's now doing very well. Since the divorce, I've had more free time, almost too much. I'm thinking of starting a new hobby with my newfound free time. I've never really had much time for myself before, so just thinking about it feels exciting. Well, let's get to it today. Today, like every other day, I am dedicated to working and taking care of the home for myself and Ryan. Imagining the fun future that awaits us, and I smile.